G'day. Welcome. Thanks for coming along. I'm David Pointon and I'll be hosting today. I'll do a bit more of an intro of myself in just a minute. But a real pleasure to have you here. Wow, that's a really loud microphone, isn't it? Is it over the top? Is it okay? Good for the hard of hearing? That's good. I've come down from Sydney today, so this is the time where I do the obligatory Melbourne weather joke. Is that right? Actually, there's nothing I got for you. It was basically the same temperature stepping off the plane as when I stepped on, so there you go. Thumbs up to Melbourne weather, hey? Great to have you here, and I've just been chatting to a few people as you've arrived. What brought you here is a really interesting mix of people. We've got people here from men's tables. Thanks, fellas. All in one row, by the way. Look at that. We've got people here with an interest through their workplace, particular interest in mental health and men's health in the workplace. We've got people here who are retired or just have a personal interest in the topic. We've got people here who are from government, even one of our funders. Thank you. And so it's great to have a mix of people and just the interest that you're showing in this topic. Men's Health Week and men's health at work. Before we go any further, I just wanted to do an acknowledgement of country. Now, I'm not so familiar with the Melbourne Indigenous peoples, so I'll see how I go with the pronunciation, but I just want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people and the Boonwurrung Boonwurrung people. Pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And it's an important thing to do, I think, because one of the things I've learned in the time I spent in Central Australia with some Indigenous people is the culture of connection with self, with others and with country. And I think that's going to be a theme that we'll definitely be exploring today in terms of the benefits of health and wellbeing for all. So just wanted to acknowledge their culture. And also a big tip to Prima for their hosting of the event. So Sally and Peter, where's Peter? There we are, down the back. We'll hear a little bit from Peter at the end. This is our fourth year, the men's table's fourth year in a working relationship in Men's Health Week. We've been working closely with Sally. 3 online events. We almost got there last year, didn't we? And then someone went and had a baby, so that didn't quite work out. But 3 years online and this year in person, so really good to finally be in the room together. Prima, in case you're not aware of their services, provide outplacement, executive coaching and corporate wellbeing right across Australia and New Zealand for all sorts of organisations. Today it's a focus on men in Men's Health Week. I've been to enough events where the focus is on men to say something that may come as a surprise to you, but I think it's important to do it, and that is that whilst we're focusing on men today, that in no way diminishes or denies the needs of health for women and for people who are gender fluid, other people who don't identify as men. But today we are going to put a focus on men, so it's not to the exclusion of others. Of course, those other groups have got important health needs as well. And also just a tip to disadvantaged communities, because we might have a certain man in our mind, but of course disadvantaged communities including Indigenous peoples, cold communities, the culturally and linguistically diverse peoples, they've got men, right? So we've got a real intersection of men across all of those disadvantaged communities as well. I'm going to introduce our wonderful panellists very shortly. I'll just lay out a brief scaffolding of the afternoon for you and give you a couple of headlines of the sort of themes we're going to dig into, so you can start preparing your questions, because you can see it's a nice intimate room and we're not going to just do questions at the end. We'll see if we can make it a bit interactive as we go. So I'm not going to put anyone on the spot, but please have a think and be prepared to ask a question or have a go. 4 things we're going to look at today. One is the challenges facing men's health and men's health at work. The second, what do we know about wellbeing and about healing? And you'll come to see more about the expertise we've got in the panel who can talk about some of these themes. We then want to discern between the needs and the issues related to the individual man and the systemic factors that influence all men or across a whole workplace. So essentially looking at healthy men and healthy workplaces as well. And then finally, we'll look at strategies and tools practical things that you can take away and hopefully do, or if you're not in a workplace now, that you can pass on to somebody in a workplace. So that's the basic layering. We're looking at a discussion up the front here that will go for somewhere between an hour and an hour and 20. And then after that, we'll break out. And even if we haven't broken out, you're always welcome to head over to the Mint and Mingle bar. Say hi, guys. And with a beautiful mint aprons, fantastic, to get yourself a drink as well. So that's the basic flow, and plenty of opportunities after we finish to hang around and say hi to others. How does all that sound? Good. Excellent. We've got 3 people on board. That's good to hear. All right. I now have the pleasure of introducing our wonderful panel. So in alphabetical order, by first name. Firstly, Alex Mottee. Please give a hand to Alex. So Alex is a clinical psychologist. He's a director at AB Clinical Psychology based in Sydney. So Alex has also come down today for this. He has a special interest in men's health and particularly burnout in the workplace. And I think we'll find that's quite a theme that emerges today. You know, many people are stretched in their workplaces and in their work. He also provides special input into organisations like the ADF, to NRL, and we are delighted to have had Alex on our own Men's Table Advisory Board for most of the time we've been going, since 2019. So thanks to Alex. Let's hear it for Alex again. And again, warm welcome to Kellie Egan. Come on up, Kellie. Let's hear it for Kellie. So Kellie brings the HR and organisational lens. So Kellie's had over 20 years of experience in HR. Most of her organisations she's worked with are high-growth tech companies. Currently the Chief People Officer for Marketplace Sir. Some more people coming in. Come on in. Welcome. It's not like a stage play where you're going to interrupt the actors. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Kellie was also the HR director for Atlassian for Asia Pacific for 5 years. And her real interest is in cultures that are thriving, where people can be doing their best work and where they can be well. And so let's hear it for Kellie again. Thanks, Kellie. And last but by no means least, Sam Manger. Dr Sam Manger. Let's hear it for Sam. So Sam is a GP with a twist. He's a GP that focuses and specialises on lifestyle medicine, so a holistic approach to wellbeing. So he's a general practitioner from Queensland in beautiful Mullaney, amazing little town in the hinterland in Queensland. He's also an academic, so he works with James Cook University as an academic lead in lifestyle medicine. And is also involved with other government-involved organisations, Equally Well Australia. He's an advisory group member of the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners. He actually won an award for the RACGP Queensland GP of the Year in 2021. And he's got also involved with the Australian Lifestyle Medicine Association. So let's hear it for Sam.
Yeah.
And we save the best till last. I'll do my bio now. Let's hear it. Yay! David Pointon. Sorry, moment of humility. I'm David Pointon. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Men's Table. So Men's Table, very briefly, is groups of about 12 men, 10 to a dozen men, who meet locally in a private room of a public place, like a pub or a restaurant, once a month on the same night of the month, same group of men, for an open-hearted conversation about how they're really going. As the months and the years roll on, they form into a really strong, connected community of men. Men's Table is a place where it's safe to have a different kind of conversation, one that's more open, where men can be vulnerable. As a result of that, they build really meaningful social connection, and they have a sense of belonging in a community. And so that's what we've found through our work. And just so you're aware of some of the background, I was also a facilitator of organisational change in my previous work for about 20 years, working with a lot of senior management teams. So I'll draw on that experience today as well. So we're now going to sit together and have a bit of a chat. And it was good to see you guys getting into the flow with each other. So hopefully you've got all the answers worked out. So we'll start with question one. And we will throw to the audience after the first conversation. And this topic, if you remember, is what are the challenges facing men at work? What are the challenges in supporting men's health at work? So maybe you've got a significant male workforce and you can see some challenges that you either hear already being discussed up here or that you can add to. Maybe you're just curious about what's different about men's health at work in contrast to everyone's health at work. So either way, get your cogs firing as we hear from the panellists. So folks, tell us, what are the challenges facing men at work and what are the challenges supporting men's health at work?
Oh, well, I'll start. Thanks. Thanks for having me, everyone. It's lovely to be here. So I thought I'd add some context around men's health more broadly and the mental and physical health challenges that men face and some of the determinants that lead to that. So the statistics around Australia is that about 20% of men in the last 12 months have suffered from some sort of mental health condition. It's a little bit less than that, but that's higher in certain groups like younger people. And possibly some of the concerning trends we're seeing in both clinical practice but also in research is that about 1 in 7, 1 in 6 men are now on antidepressants, and that's the second highest. Australia is the second highest country in the OECD. We're only behind Iceland, and they've at least got the excuse of having no sunshine. But Melbourne seems to have that excuse too, to be fair. But so Australia doesn't have that excuse so much. And the rates of antidepressant prescribing have doubled in the 10 years before COVID and went up another 30-40% over COVID. So we're seeing clearly a significant signal here that there are mental health concerns in the male community, but it's largely being responded to with a biomedical model, with a sort of antidepressant model, which of course has its place. It can be life-saving, life-improving for the right people at the right time, but there seems to be this preponderance to that. In response, for men's health, we know that about 70% of men, give or take, don't attend their sort of GP for their mental health problems. And when they do, they generally book shorter appointments, and they generally come much later in their illness. So they come when it's much more advanced, either physical or mental. And that obviously presents a whole raft of challenges as well. And this is parallel to physical health. So from the year 2000 to 2020, we saw a tripling in the number of people with diabetes. It's much more common in men. We see men have a lot, generally poorer diets on average, overweight more likely on average. And at the same rate, I'm sorry to scare some of the men in here, but we've seen about an average 20% reduction in testosterone levels in men. And that's likely because of this burden of chronic disease, this metabolic disease. And it's important to say that all of these things, at least what I can see in the literature and what I've seen in clinical practice, is these are responses to sort of biopsychosocial, cultural and spiritual distress. And how people's genetics are depends on how that exactly manifests. But when we look at the underlying causes of that distress, those lifestyle and social determinants, whether it's food, movement, social connection, the social connection one that we're seeing probably deteriorate the fastest out of all of them. So diet hasn't been great for a while, but it certainly is getting worse on average, ultra-processed foods and so on. Physical activity is slowly shifting. Smoking has obviously got a lot better. But social connection, in the 1970s, 1980s, about 1 in 10 men would report that they feel lonely. Now it's about 4 in 10 men on average. And that's a pretty high statistic that we're seeing there. And more people rating that they report extreme isolation as opposed to sort of, simple loneliness, as it were. And the impact on work is massive because we've seen multiple studies show that those who have a poorer health status, especially mental health status, I think from average, it's about 9 times more likely to have sick leave, 3 times less productive, 4 times more likely to leave in the next 12 months that workplace. So there's huge flow-on effects into people's personal but also professional lives. But the reverse is also true, that workplaces that do put in wellbeing initiatives, like Dell and Johnson & Johnson and other sort of big companies who've started doing this in a sort of, let's say, organised, systematic way. For every $1 they spend on wellbeing programs, they get $3 back in productivity gains and absenteeism, presenteeism shifts in the workforce. So there's a real place for proactive nature here. So we can see these trends, but it's really important for us to be proactive about it.
Great, thanks, you want to say something, Kellie, from your experience in the workplace?
Sure, probably less on the stats, but that was so interesting. No, so interesting. So I obviously come from a different lens, given being in the HR role, and I sort of think about it in terms of, even pre-COVID, if you like. And in my role, often it can play a critical part with people coming to me only once they feel there's a level of trust and credibility. So, often when I'm joining companies, whether it be Atlassian and typically male-dominated companies where I'm working, and no one would typically come, straight up and be like, I have something to share. And I tend to find men are less likely to share. They tend to just battle on and have this can-do attitude. Unless, of course, it's the man flu. And then it's like, I'm not sure how long I've got to live. Seems to totally change the game. But if it is something more, and there is something more of a personal challenge there, in my experience, it's been that only unless I've actually observed something, or I'm sitting down with someone and having a very open conversation, is there a level of share going to happen that people feel comfortable to be like, there is something going on, I'd like to be able to share that with you. And so there's, even one scenario I can think of where there was a young manager and he'd just been promoted, had a he's probably in his late 20s, early 30s, taken on one of the biggest roles that he'd been in, very ambitious. This is at Atlassian, so it's built around people being successful. There's no really opportunity to not do well. So you're sitting amongst the best, taking a step up, young family, and I sort of started to introduce a bit of this, coaching, wellbeing coaching, and I identified some people who were high potentials, identified this, he was one of them. And through some of these sort of wellbeing coaches, I found out that he was close to resigning. And he was struggling on many fronts. And, knowing that he had to live to this high expectation that either he put in his own mindset, or some of it may have been from the business as well. Personal pressures were there as well. He basically had the assumption made that it was work that was the main cause for him not coping with things. And through some, psychologists that we had sort of come into the business, and I was just trialing out a little of a program, he was close to resigning. No one had a clue. One of our absolute star performers. The psychologist then introduced some, just simple strategies and getting a little bit more support and help at home and taking more breaks, etc. And he realised that work was not the contributing factor at all. There was actually other things that he could actually do. But he was in no way going to come and share that with me or anyone. It was just through, a very spontaneous ad hoc type scenario that we actually uncovered that. And it made me sort of then think about, gee, what else is actually going on that people are, and I realize everyone, I think, has their struggles and their challenges, and and just sort of seeing how different men cope and think about what they need to do, what their role is, professionally and personally. And they're less likely, in my experience, to perhaps share that with many, whether it be with friends and network, people at work. I'm seeing an evolution of that, and that's changing slightly. But in my experience, perhaps not enough. And there's a bit of a, me, when I look at what happened when everyone was in the office, there were more opportunities. I was even able to play a role to observe some of these changes going on with people. Or people would identify and just let me know, saying that person doesn't look quite on. I've noticed that there's something not quite right with them, and it's been that way for a bit of time. Maybe you want to have a chat. So I would then sort of step in and have those conversations. I now work at a place where it's hybrid or maybe it's remote, and knowing and seeing those observations is less likely. And it's just like, people are now just forced to kind of cope on their own, or in whatever way they see sort of makes sense. And I'm finding that to be quite a challenge at the moment. I'm not noticing it as much. People experiencing the same, and it sounds like perhaps even more challenges, whether it be just from a personal coping mechanism or going into something a little bit darker than that, and how are we actually pulling through that, and what are we doing to support each other, and hopefully some of that starts today, and some of it has already started. So just some thoughts from my perspective.
Great, thanks, Kellie. Back to you, Alex.
Hi everybody, thank you for having me here actually. Yeah, I'm actually quite excited to be here, both as a clinical psychologist, but am I loud enough, everybody? Both as a clinical psychologist, excuse me, I'm battling something, recovering from something, and a man, to be doing something like this, talking about these things, these issues, I think is awesome. And look, I value what the panelists have said thus far, because I'm a clinical psychologist. I see in private practice, I see men, I see all people who are experiencing ill health. And for sure, precursors to ill mental health, excuse me, things like men not talking or not being able to talk or not be willing to talk, is really where mental health disorders live, where the inside doesn't quite match the outside, the external world. So I think it's great that we're talking about it. And I'd like to add and maybe pick up on what Sam said about loneliness. There is an epidemic of loneliness amongst men, and this has been established in research the last 5-10 years, but maybe something that we intuitively know. Statistically, I think it's 1 in 6, almost to 1 in 2 men experience feelings of loneliness. And of course, we know loneliness isn't just being alone, but the idea of feeling disconnected from the world, not in touch with the people around them. Again, really a high-risk place for mental health disorders, not having a sense of belonging. Yeah, so when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking, maybe a way to think about this, because I deal with ill mental health, is, well, why do men come to therapy? Particularly if they don't talk, right? And it is pretty true. About half of the men who have mental health issues don't actually go and talk about what's going on for them. That's what the research kind of tells us. But so why do men come? And look, particularly if we put a work lens around it, quite often men are presenting to me, appearing, if work's sort of been part of the factor, appearing as quite depressed. So, but in addition to being depressed, we might know what that means, something to do with low mood or feeling lack of motivation or withdrawn or just not themselves. But in addition to that, we might see an overlay of a bit of existential worry. So this is, when I see these two things together and they've come from a workplace, this immediately sparks in my mind this idea of burnout. We've heard of what burnout is. All of us kind of use the term colloquially to maybe mean burning out as in perhaps closer to stressing out or feeling, spent or cooked or whatever it might be, right, at the end of my tether. But in a clinical setting, now I'm mindful it's not a diagnostic term, burnout, but we see these it's what we might call burnout syndrome, where we see all these kind of things that happen at the same time, where someone's feeling really ineffective, they're feeling exhausted, but also they have this existential worry where, it's like a cynicism. We might think of that worker we see that's kind of cruising around going, oh, what's the point of this? Well, why am I doing this? What's the purpose? And actually that part right there is, from a psychological perspective, one of the greatest challenges, and probably not just with men, but with all workers, employees, and all of us should be thinking about it. But really for men, when they come in this deadly combination of not wanting to talk or not willing to talk, then be suffering with this internal dysregulation that kind of goes on. So I think from that ill mental health perspective, I see those precursors and probably the challenges we talk about today, and things like environmental challenges, the intuitive ones that we can think of that men might confront, whether they be financial pressures or pressures to succeed or working at home or working in the office. They might be all risk factors or precursors, and then hopefully I'm hoping to add today where we might see those warning signs for someone that's drifting in to ill mental health.
Thanks everyone. Great start to the conversation. Lots of good food for thought straight away, and I think we'll probably keep delayering some of these ideas a little further. A couple of things that we notice at the men's table, in terms of that sense of isolation and loneliness, when men first come to our entree night, the intro opportunity, we ask them a few questions. One is, why have you come? And we give them some drop-downs as options. 40%, I think it is. Is that right, Nicole? Our head of marketing's here. Nicole? Say hi, Nicole. 40% of, and that's a sample of about 3,000 men, have ticked looking for friendship and connection. So by far and away the most strongest reason for them coming. The next after that is, I think, 19%. Interestingly, looking for a place to have a real conversation. And you know, we hear that being interpreted as a place where I can talk about what's actually going on and not just the superficial banter that a lot of blokes are in. And then the other thing that we notice is our whole model is actually based on the simple premise that if one man is willing to kick the door of vulnerability open by just saying something about his feelings, about what's inside of him, that is an invitation and an opportunity that keeps that door open for other men to walk through. And that's the basic pattern that drives a men's table, is each month, you know, somebody's going to start, and if they just talk about the weather or, you know, how the footy was on the weekend, it sets a certain tone. But if that first man or the second man goes, okay, I've got something I really need to get off my chest, and they do that, it's an invitation and the other men follow. And that's what creates that culture of openness and vulnerability. So there are a couple of things that we're noticing, and sitting behind that is this sort of traditional masculine norm, this stoic man who has to do it all himself, can't show any weakness, and doesn't maybe get help, has a shorter visit at the GP. What a simple and fascinating stat that is. So curious about whether these ideas are resonating with you, what's popping in your mind already. So anyone got any comments or a question or just something they want to throw into the mix at this early point in the conversation? What are you noticing in your workplaces or as a man or with the men in your life?
Hi, I've got a question probably directed to Sam. When you were saying that pharmacological intervention is so prevalent in treating men's depression, what can you see might be a successful alternative to that? Because I am a pharmacist and I dispense a lot of antidepressants to men, and a lot of them don't want to be taking them, but are taking them because there's no other alternative as far as...
Should I hand out my business card or...?
Great question. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a big question because it brings into culture as well as just specific treatment, say, for mental health. So, specific to, let's say, someone comes in psychological distress, it's important to recognise that we give labels of depression. You know, depression is a diagnostic syndrome described by symptoms. There is no sort of underlying pathophysiological process that we can identify that causes depression and anxiety. There's an enormous amount of crossover between all of these mental health conditions, and because they are just symptom described. And so they come in, life is crap for whatever number of reasons, whether they're chronically unwell or relationship problems or workplace problems or whatever it be, and they, you know, the cultural system, as it were, as a clinical GP, is that, you know, they, as we said, men might come in quite late, so they might come in more advanced stages or more acutely in crisis, and they have 15-minute appointments as well as all the other stuff we do in that appointment. And culturally, it's very hard as a health professional to go, oh, I've got to fix all of this. You know, you seem pretty sick. Let's give you an antidepressant just to tide you over. Now, the guidelines for this actually say two things. The first thing is that antidepressants should only be continued for 6 to 12 months and then reviewed. But that is absolutely not being followed. The average length of antidepressant prescribing is about 6 to 10 years. So we are way over prescribing in that sense. They're also incredibly hard to get off. Okay, so the guidelines, I was just explaining this to Kellie, this is a little bit off topic, so I apologise. But the guidelines suggest that, you know, you kind of half the dose over a month and then half another month, and you get people off over about 1 or 2 months. But they did a study in Denmark recently, and they showed that for all the people on antidepressants, only 7% of people could tolerate coming off antidepressants at that speed. Everyone else needs to come off it over years. That's how hard it is to get off antidepressants. It is not a simple medication, and it's been branded as a simple medication. In fact, the entire concept of depression has been branded incorrectly around the sort of serotonin hypothesis, and it's all BS. right? It's a marketing campaign to drive prescriptions. However, that's not to say distress is BS. Obviously, distress is very real. And antidepressants can help people in periods of distress. That's where their place is. If you look at the NICE guidelines, which are the sort of United Kingdom guidelines on depression, and the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatry guidelines, they actually list about 21 treatments available for the evidence-based treatments for depression. 3 of them are pharmaceutical, and really only for moderate to severe depression, enduring depression. Mild to moderate depression should not be given antidepressants if you can avoid it, and everyone should be reviewed at a certain point. The other 18 interventions are psychotherapy, social connection, exercise. We've now got 4 randomised control trials showing that a Mediterranean diet can reverse 32% of depression because of the anti-inflammatory effects on the brain and the gut. We're doing the world's first randomised control trial now at JCU with my colleagues on a ketogenic diet and schizophrenia, showing incredible results that it reverses psychotic symptoms. So we're learning so much more about what are the determinants of mental illness and therefore how to treat it without relying on pharmaceutical measures. So hopefully that answers your question. There are other things, and the guidelines do say other things, but the wider healthcare culture is another barrier to that, and that's why I try and do what I do. But so let's watch this space. There are more of us trying.
And we might use that as a segue to the next part of the conversation. So the question, I think, tips us in well. In the conversation we had in preparation, I really liked how this emerged as we were talking about what would we talk about here. What do we know about well-being, and what do we know about healing? What's the process of healing, and what are some of the principles and practices and things, and specifically things that relate to men. So I don't know if you want to kick us off, Alex?
Yeah,
with some
sure.
thoughts there, and we can go across the panel again.
So I was thinking about how to from a clinical psychology or psychological perspective, how best to address this, and I thought maybe exploring a little bit the idea of why men don't talk, and I suppose that might spark off in everyone's mind this perhaps well-established idea about masculinity and what it means to talk, but I think from an individual sort of standpoint, that there's 3 main drivers why men might not talk, and I think I'll spell this out, and I think it sort of informs what we need to sort of attack from maybe a talk therapy standpoint, but even just a general well-being standpoint to guide someone recovering or healing. So yeah, for sure, someone's beliefs or cognitions relating to what it means to talk. So quite often there's, encounter people, or we might know people that would say, well, it's not really gonna help, and that could be a learned response or something else. But actually there's a really prolific cognition that sort of rests in masculinities and men that actually talking or giving fuel to an emotion will create this forever burning fire that we can't extinguish. So there's actually harm in talking. So the idea that there could be harm in talking. So this might be a barrier to well-being. And then secondly, that in terms of these drivers for why men might not talk, secondly would be personal adequacy. So may or may not surprise you, but a lot of men feel inadequate, and that inadequacy is, we're not really allowed to express that. Showing fragility is, I guess from the societal concept, might not be okay, but also from a personal concept, we all, if we're feeling inadequate, we all struggle with that, male or otherwise. And so this idea of adequacy and my sense of self-worth or permission to actually talk about what's going on can present a bit of a barrier. And third, and probably the reason that people might come see me as a clinical psychologist most often, is actually the capacity to talk. So actually feeling ready and able to organize internal thoughts and emotions in a way that actually makes sense, so the person in front can digest and actually talk about what's going on. And we think about that as a resource or our capacity to talk and express ourselves. We think of it as a finite well. And if someone's going through the day, not talking or struggling with this mismatch between internally and externally, and what we might call surface acting, so they're encountering clients day in, day out, and putting a smile on their face, or trying to match the energy of the person in front of them for maybe a commercial reason. You know, that person then depletes that resource that they've got, and you know, within that they might want to withdraw and fall into themselves, and that's quite often where, you know, all of the negative behaviours that go along with you know, masculinity and men's well-being or ill mental health in men, that's usually where it resides. That's the angry man that we might see, and so I mean, I think those three factors are really important when we're thinking about well-being and healing from a psychological perspective. So we're actually thinking about addressing each one individually and how we might go about creating connection around each of those ideas. Mm-hmm.
Very good, thank you. Kellie or Sam?
Yeah, I was just, as you're sort of talking then, I was just thinking that I think at times in my experience, I'm not sure if people that I've worked with have actually been that self-aware to actually know, is this a time to start talking about it? And they're sort of internalizing it, and the awareness isn't clicking in, thinking, oh, this is a trigger. Maybe this is a time where I need to raise it and raise the awareness. And who is there now that I need to talk to about it? Often I find more on the male side, and even, you know, females or any sort of gender identification tend to like to go to those they trust, which is their inner circles. There was no surprise when you said with the men's table, a lot were joining for that connection and that sort of social interaction. You know, I was even talking to friends who play golf like pretty much every day, and I'm like, is this a topic that comes up at golf? Like, surely around the tees and stuff, like, you know, there's some openness and vulnerability in talking, and it's still not likely unless, as you sort of mentioned, someone may start the conversation. Then it seems to get a little bit more energy around it. I even know from where I'm working that my CEO and the co-founder a couple of years ago, he had his own personal challenge occur where his brother was in a tragic accident in Switzerland and fighting for his life, and he went there with his mum and was just trying to figure things out. Unfortunately, his brother passed, and not long after that, his father had passed away then as well, and so a lot of these emotions. And he was just very vulnerable and very open and quite sort of tearful in just sharing a personal experience, which really created that level of openness and that role model that I think many look for, and maybe we just don't have. You know, I wonder whether we have enough of those people in our lives to sort of say it's okay to like talk about, you know, what things are working or, you know, potentially more so when they're not working. Who's sort of demonstrating that it's okay to have these conversations, to open up the door, because that was one that we had in my workplace, but it's happened, you know, once in a blue moon. Those sort of scenarios happen where someone at that level is very vulnerable and sharing some very raw emotions, and really just getting on the table and letting everyone know it's okay to talk it through. But on the other side, you know, the other sort of thinking I have, being that more of the eternal optimist and always more about hope, that I sort of find myself that I see a lot of men doing things that are they're either subconsciously or consciously, you know, maybe it's going down the pub, footy, golf, sports, doing little outlets that I think are, you know, just helping expose and building connections that I think are helping any of these early triggers or warning signs, you know, whether it be around the isolation or burnout, and just, you know, looking for little like hobbies and outlets of things to do, more so than I think females are doing, to create some of those connections, which I don't know, and I'd probably look for my panelists here, may actually have some help in helping people move forward and battle early signs of any of these concerns that might be, could turn into something a little bit more serious.
Thanks, Kellie. Yeah, go Ray.
I'm glad you talked about golf, but I mean, I have to give it away.
About time.
All
Yeah.
they talk about with their return on their investment of the superannuation fund. There's absolutely no depth in that culture.
Yes.
And the other thing was, as the husband and wife life changed, most of the young people about 35 are looking at their watch about 16 holes. They have to get home and pick the kids up. And so there was really nothing that I found in that sport. And it's interesting, I just wanted to say, what I hear about that's growing and making our age people feel better is the men's shed. They really get down to tin tacks in the men's shed. I mean, I belong to men's organisations that are not meeting that. And we're trying to change it around. I'm a Freemason. I mean, the commitment to that really in-depth, getting to talk about things that men want to do, it disappeared. So we've lost Lions, we've lost Rotary, it's become Progress. Churches are mostly women now, older women, with a few of us older boys sticking around. So there's a challenge and this is why I've been interested in this group from its beginning, because we have to find something where we can change the commitment and understand what we're working with. I managed 7 oil rigs, all men. I call them ugly because they don't have that culture within them. It's get the work, the bosses to get the work done. The people are safety oriented, but they talk about it, but they don't do it. And so we've got a real challenge because we've got a bunch of people now that are building a life that's not real.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Lack of opportunity, but there's a desire there, but there's no opportunity, so where do you go?
The commitment to that, if you want to talk about the soft, what we call soft, I think, is that they disappear within 2 seconds. So they don't want to talk about it. And you can't, very difficult to get a conversation.
Thanks for your comments, Ray. And the social connection thing, I think, is something we'll come back to again before the conversation finishes. But turning to wellbeing and healing, keen to hear your perspective, Sam. Before we hear from you, I will share a personal story which relates to the segue to GPs. I've got a beautiful daughter, 26 now, maybe it was 2 years ago. Dad, have you seen a GP? No, not for a while. Dad, I want you to see a GP. Okay. 6 months later, Dad, did you see a GP? Not yet. It got to the point, I said, okay, I'll do you a deal. You know that spare tyre in your boot that is flat? You get that fixed, I'll see the GP. It did get me there. I still had to take it to the tyre shop, but that's okay. So I consider myself reasonably self-aware. Here I was still kind of resisting the idea of just seeing a GP, just checking up on my health. I don't know if you want to pick up on that theme, but I know you had some other things you want to say too, Sam, about wellbeing and healing more generally, and specifically to men.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say here. I just want to comment on the point I made before about the 21 treatments. It's interesting because when they look at the most effective, in particular when they look at adult men, is problem-solving therapy. And I think that's a very interesting context for men because we do like a problem, we like to solve a problem. And it's interesting how the specific type of therapies can be brought into that. The other thing is the points you raised around lack of, I suppose, cultural institutions or cultural norms where men... This is where we can actually learn a lot from First Nation groups like Indigenous people because the concepts of rites of passage, of going from a boy to a man or a man to an elder, and accepting that transformational period in life where we let go, shed the old, and we embrace the frightening but new, is something we've forgotten, I think, in our culture, and we're now realising, whoops, we actually need to do that. And the beauty of places like Men's Shed and the Men's Table and other is that we're starting to recreate that culture where men can come together and share what it means to be a man, to be a father, to be a husband, to be a dad, to be an employee, etc. And we can start to go through that essentially life transformation together. And there aren't enough of those spaces. And like as a GP, I think we need to sort of highlight that and refer more and embrace that. But workplaces definitely can. I mean, there's not a lot we can change at the macro level, but there's a lot we can change in the micro settings, in micro cultures, whether that's communities or workplaces or schools or health settings. These are micro settings where we can actually change culture a great deal, and we should take that opportunity. As far as healing goes, what we've seen in healthcare is again a dominance of focusing on what's wrong. Problem lists, risk factors, disabilities, diagnoses, anti-inflammatories, antidepressants, anti-anxiety, antibiotics. everything is anti, everything is sort of a negative focus. And that's okay. We need to be aware of what's going wrong. But where we've dropped the ball and we're realising now is that we need to focus on the strengths, the protective factors, the resilience. What's actually working well? What can we build on? What are things this person cares about? What are their values and so on? And can I get into a bit of fine detail, a bit of physiology? Is that all right? I'll watch people's eyes, and if they start rolling back, I'll curtail myself. But I just want to make the point around that when you're in my position as a GP who does, I suppose, I do normal medicine, inverted commas, and I do, I suppose you could say, lifestyle social medicine. And one thing that's really struck me over the last sort of 10, 15 years I've been practicing is that we seem to have forgotten how much we can heal. We seem to think that disease is once there, it's set, and the best thing we can do is slow it down. We can stem the tide of depression or diabetes, but we can't heal from it. And that's a great cultural, it's very sad that that's happened, because when you put people in the right context, with the right people, and one conversation can change a person's complete trajectory in life. You get them on the right diet or moving in the way that they appreciate and they can connect with their body, or any number of avenues. There are lots of keystone experiences that people can have that end up being the major shift in the rest of their life. But we need to be building in these layers of opportunity so people can have that interaction with that keystone change. And and we know this isn't just soft stuff. Yes, people feel better, they report feeling better, but I've seen people's diabetes reverse, I've seen autoimmune diseases reverse, I've seen heart disease reverse. I've mentioned before around severe mental illness like schizophrenia, we're now seeing that go into reverse. I mean, we've barely scraped the surface of how much the body has the capacity to heal when we put it into the context that it can do so. And there's lots of mechanisms around that, which I was going to talk about, but I think I'd just be talking too much. So I'm not going to. But except to give us a sense of hope that once we start to do this, we see the personal benefits, but obviously, as I mentioned before, we'll see all the work benefits, the productivity, and all those other aspects as well.
Great. I won't throw to you each time we finish a little section here, but like Ray did before, just call out. Yep, here we go. Question.
Sorry, I just want to bring up something. There seems to be a base assumption here that I'm not agreeing with. You seem to assume that when there is a group of men together, there's some sort of social interaction. In my experience, a workplace is not a place of social interaction. You're not going to tell the person next to you you've got problems, and God knows you're not going to HR, because they're the ones writing the list about who's going to go next. Seriously. You're not going to share that with them, you're not going to share it with the people. And so just because this topic is about the workplace, the workplace is not a place for that type of it's typically not a place for that type of social conversation, because you have all sorts of consequences from that which are immediate and ongoing. So when we talk about this issue in the workplace, you're not around a group of peers. You're around a group of people that were hired at the same time that may have nothing in common with.
Thanks for your comment. What's your name, sorry? Andrew. Thanks, Andrew. It's a perfect segue to where we wanted to go next. I know you think, he's just saying that. It's on my sheet though. We were going to look at, we've been talking about men and the individual man, but what about the workplace? What about the system? We've got Steve running a mostly male organisation here. He's probably thinking, I've got to think about the whole organisation. Sure, each man needs care, but how do we address the workplace culture or the systemic factors? So we wanted to move along to that, to discern between the differences and the things we can do for one man versus the system or the workplace. So don't know who was going to kick us off on that.
Yeah, I'm happy just to have a conversation. So totally understand where you're coming from, and I think it's definitely the view of many, and I even know, whether it be at Lassie and other places I've joined, that that people don't even understand what I'm there to do, what my role is, question it. And fortunately, though, I've seen an evolution and some change, and everyone's different, though. So I recognise that there's many in my space and field that may not be the most suited people to go and have these conversations with, where you feel there's a level of trust. And I totally also understand that for many, they may not feel that a work is a place to talk about, personal challenges or things going on internally that they're faced with, and is that the right place and environment. Is there HR? Is there peers? Totally can understand that. I am seeing a change in that. And, you know, whether it be through from a government legislation now, they're actually asking all companies to actively do some sort of actions and take activities to address the psychosocial aspects of a workplace. And a lot of that is around what are you doing to ensure that there aren't any symptoms of burnout or health concerns going on. So now workplaces are required to demonstrate that on a regular basis from a broader perspective. I know I personally was, you know, in my workplaces, I struggled with the fact of not feeling that there was anything I could do proactively to support those individuals. And it was only a minority who would come to me, but I realised they weren't going anywhere at all. But those who were coming to me and sharing, and then they would, you know, often then say, it's okay, you can go to Kellie, and it might organically grow. But there weren't a lot of people that I felt that a lot of men could trust and knew where to go. So I was struggling with knowing, I was always felt very reactive. So there was already some challenges going on with people, and I was like, how do we deal with this way before it gets into something more severe than this? And so some of the psychologists I was dealing with through an EAP program came to me and sort of shared, and it might have been one of the future topics, but at least it was it's called GLWS, which is a Global Leadership Wellbeing Solutions, and it's this survey that was a little costly, couldn't scale, but it was great. And it was a survey that I could then send out to anyone who I thought, you know, might be interested in it. Lots of questions, and you could find out, and I did it myself, and find out the early triggers, you know, just some early radars of things before it turned into anything a little bit more than that. And then I would set up the right people, and for me in my role, and I think for many HR professionals, ideally it's not taking on every aspect of every role. I'm no expert in this field. You know, I'm there and my role is quite different to what Sam and Adam are doing, for sure. So, but for me, it's really about, you know, knowing what role can I play with supporting individuals who are turning up and spending so much time at work. If I'm observing some behaviours or some symptoms and signs, I feel like I've got a role to have a conversation to see, is someone seeking some help, where would they go? Because what I was finding is people didn't know where to go or what to do. I'm now also seeing, for the first time, perhaps in the last year or two, when I ask leaders and executives and boards as well, what would be some of the biggest, you know, challenges and responsibilities of your role? 5 years ago, it might have been deliver results, build a great team, whatever it might be. Now it's around employee well-being. And that's just happened in the last year or two. Yeah, it's so fast. And I'm like, wow, this is great. I'm like, that's great. You see this as your role, but do you know what you're doing in that space? And it's still, that's where the greyness is. They're like, I want to know what's going on, if people are doing well or not doing well. And, you know, is there something that is, you know, preventing them from doing their best work, but they've got the lack of knowledge and experience to know what to do next, which is then when they may come to me or hopefully go somewhere else, and it might lead them into the safe sort of conversations with Sam or Adam here as well. But I totally hear where you're coming from, and hopefully we're seeing some progress, but we've still got a lot of opportunity to get there.
Actually, I think, Sam, looking at what you might have wanted to say, just around how hazardous workplaces actually are, was that something you were going to add? I think maybe to add on, and then I was going to make more of a comment about individual factors. I can't really speak to the system. I work individually. So maybe, Sam, if you want to make your comments, and maybe I'll comment on... Was that right? You had... Yeah, okay. Well, I did... There we go. I did want to... I mean, I think one of the things that you're saying there is really important. You know, are people actually talking at work? But is it work a place to talk? You know, I think what that sort of, as an outsider, that says to me that potentially there's some hazards there. You know, Kellie's just referred to psychosocial hazards being part of a mandatory workplace risk assessment, workplace, what's the terminology? Workplace wellbeing?
Psychosocial safety.
Safety, yeah, workplace health and safety, thank you, yeah. So obviously something's happening there. How do we calculate it? I think that's what they're trying to do, but obviously there's a risk in the workplace. maybe people not able to talk to each other or not wanting to talk to each other talks to a culture that's problematic. Maybe not. It's not my area of expertise. And talking isn't a mandatory in having good mental health. I mean, none of the things that we're saying, because we don't talk, that means we have bad mental health. No, they could be risk factors. Look, that's what I want to say on the system, but individually there are some clear risk factors, particularly around burnout, that we can see. If someone is to burnout, quite often there is these personality factors that are part of it. You'll see someone, and this is probably somewhat intuitive, but you'll see someone that might be, they might subscribe to these unrelenting standards where they're constantly working, or they're trying to work harder. They might be low in assertiveness, so maybe low in confidence. They're not really asserting themselves where they need to, or perhaps quite compliant. And also might struggle with stress management, or kind of that thing I was talking about where the outside looks a certain way but the inside's completely different. They might not have a good sense of work-life balance. I mean, they're the kind of individual risk factors we might think about. And then one of the other factors that I think straddles between individual and system is, what actually motivates people to be at work? What's the motivator, intrinsic or extrinsic, to be at work? And I was talking to the Uber driver on the way over. That's where I get all my good ideas from. And he was explaining to me, he was driving Uber, and you have that conversation, don't you, about his day and everything. So I'm going to go do this talk on men's health. What's your experience of your mental health in the workplace? And he goes, I've worked in this chicken factory for 12 and a half years, and I worked day and day. He was a hanger, he told me. I don't know if anyone knows anything about chickens, but he was a hanger where you sort of pick up the chicken and you hang it and you pluck in it. It's like, this is the job, right? He said he would come home stinking. He would get on the train and people knew he was the chicken guy and just clear out. And I was like, Chicken man. And I was like, wow, 12 and a half years. He goes, yep, 12 and a half years. And then there was a change in structure, and 1 month later I left. And I thought, gee, well, what happened? He goes, well, they merged, and there was this new boss that came in, and they started making these certain requirements and demands, and the team structure changed, and I left. I couldn't be there, and they sort of pushed me out, but I resigned. And I thought, 12 and a half years, like the knowledge about chickens this man must have, right? But the passion, right? He's telling me about how much he smelled. The passion he must have. And I sort of said to him, I was like, wow, 1 month. And I was like, if they paid you double, do you reckon you would have stayed? And he goes, no, I wouldn't have stayed. And I thought it was actually quite a powerful example of what brings people to work. And I think it straddles individual and systemic responsibility around well-being. It's actually understanding your personnel and understanding what actually drives them to sort of be there, and it's not always financial, so yeah, it's a bit of a nuanced conversation about chickens. So.
Great example. I bet you got 5 stars on that review.
Yeah. I bulk billed him, don't worry.
I've got one about human beings. No, you go. I got one about human beings. West Texas drilling, and there was about 10 or 12 drilling rigs down there, and it was the trouble. Management looking at it, highest instant record, bad performance, done. And so I said, I'll go down and try and help them. And the comment from the boss was, better men than you have gone down and tried and help them. And I said, okay. I said, well, I don't score myself on it, but I'm going down. And invariably, every manager told me they were only there just seeing out their time because there's nothing in this job for me, all of them. And I'm about to retire. I said, let's talk about that. And you know what I did? It was just a conversation about, instead of managing the outcome, try and get them to learn to influence the outcome. And now they're running around saying the West is best. Which is just a simple conversation like that. He said to me, the first time the boss has ever come down and talked to me. And then when I facilitated the boss to come down and talk to them, as soon as he got rid of his talk, which was all, gobbledygook, he said, enough of this shit, let's get to work. So that's how they were being treated. So it was amazing change. Yeah. For nothing. Just care.
Prime example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And productivity increased.
Sam, did you want to weigh into this one?
Yeah, Andrew, your point I think is really key. And like the traditional role of a job is to produce an outcome, a product or whatever it be. It's not there to make friends. You're not there to talk about your feelings. You're there to do a job, pluck chickens, and and get it out, right? And so I understand that and I respect that point. I think, and that can't be loose face. I think there's no assumption here that people. That men naturally interact at work. That's in fact why we're here, because that doesn't happen. But it's the point being made is that we have an opportunity to proactively change the culture, and in doing so, we give men opportunities. It's not set in stone. They don't have to follow those opportunities. Opportunities to, as I said, find some sort of benefit to their well-being, and in doing so, improve business outcomes, aka productivity, less sick leave, higher maintenance in the workforce. As I said, people who are unhealthy or workplaces that don't offer workplace wellbeing programs are 4 times more likely to lose employees in the 12 months. So, and this happened here, a change in culture. The person's like, well, I've been doing this job, I'm happy to do the job, I'm good at my job, but I don't want to work in this culture. So we're sort of reflecting on the culture and what can be done there. And I would add to the nuance there that I'm not suggesting, I don't think anyone here is suggesting that we need to get men to start opening up about their feelings at work. But what we do need to do is start creating opportunities to at least normalise this conversation and normalise wellness and well-being. And it could be a physical activity thing at work, it could be a diet thing, it could be a catch up and just vent about the boss sort of thing. It could be any sort of opportunities, but as I say, my experience is that, I've seen people with severe mental illness popping in and out of the ED departments and going in and out of their acute psychiatric wards, in and out. And then one person has a conversation with me, had a conversation in this one case with this young man who was just going in and out, and he'd lost his jobs and da-da-da. And I asked him, what do you actually, what do you love spending your time doing? What do you value? What are you passionate about? And he was pretty lost, but he said martial arts of all things. It's like, all right, interesting, I wasn't expecting that. And he didn't do any martial arts. We had a bit of a coaching session. I encouraged him to just go and watch a local karate class. And then I saw him a month later, and he said, you know what, I watched it, and then I tried it at home. I was trying to do what they were doing at home, and I was so out of breath that I thought, oh man, I need to start running. And then I thought, then I quit smoking because I was so short of breath all the time. And then I actually got the courage and I went to the class and I met some fellas, and then he ended up getting a job because his confidence had gone up and his well-being had gone up. And so it's not, I don't really think linearly in the sense of A to B. It's sort of like, what are the other factors that are going to support this person as a complex human being that are going to make them better at their job, a better employee, but also just better full stop in the sense of their well-being. When it comes to so that's just in context of that. When it comes to the culture, because I think I've consulted on a bunch of workplace wellbeing programs for Ernst & Young and other sort of big groups, and probably the thing that grates me the most is when they go, right, so let's start a yoga class. I'm like, oh, fuck off. It's like, stop with the window dressing, you know what I mean? Like, you can't just create a little meditation class at the end of the day and think everyone should be smiling and loving their job after that. You have to reflect in the institution, on the culture that you have in this place. And if well-being, inverted commas, is part of that culture, then you're going to get a good response. But don't just keep grinding people and then expect them to be able to meditate for 10 minutes at the end of the day and then it's all going to be fine. So there's a sort of deeper conversation that we're, I suppose, encouraging here, not with any sort of this is the set way to do it. Freud, whether he really said this or not, I don't know, it could be one of those internet things, but he said, before diagnosing yourself with depression, make sure you're not, in fact, surrounded by arseholes. And, so the culture of this is incredibly important. And it's a risk, a hazard, when we're doing these workplace wellbeing stuff, is to go, let's just focus on that individual and do everything we can. You do what you can, but you've got to zoom out, and it's not about setting people a prescription, it's about providing people opportunities. And within that, and I can give various examples of, and I probably will later, but about what are the sort of processes you can follow there that will guide that, but then also, what are the sort of principles there are.
And we are about to move toward the final chapter in the conversation about strategies and tools and things we can do. I do appreciate your comment and your question though, Andrew, and and just the audience interaction, it's great. So we're able to sort of respond to what's coming up for you guys. A couple of other thoughts to your question too, Andrew, that occurred to me. And maybe I'm a bit like Kellie, a bit of an optimist. But, you know, the prospect of the workplace as a community, I think, is a real possibility. It's not attainable in some workplaces because the culture is so poor from the top, and that vision, that possibility that's been created from the senior leadership isn't allowing for that sense of community. At the men's table, in our 2024 annual survey, we just asked our men at tables a bunch of extra questions this year than we've asked them before. One of the questions was simply, if you feel stuck or troubled, I can't remember the exact wording, but to what extent would you reach out to other men at your table for support? 75% of men said, yes, I would. I'd reach out to the other men at my table if I'm stuck or troubled. That's community. That's social capital. Now, is that possible in a workplace? You'd hope so. You'd hope that it's possible to create that sense that I could reach out to a colleague if I was stuck. Some people go, nah, not in the places I work. Well, there's work to be done then in that culture. But let's hope that, you know, the changes you're noticing, Kellie, where there is more attention to wellbeing, there is more attention to care, as your example shows, Ray, is starting to emerge. It probably wasn't there 25 years ago in the average workplace. Care? No, we just come to work and do a job. But probably, you know, care is a key element of fostering a workplace where people can be looking out for each other. So I just wanted to drop that in from the men's table perspective. I'm also conscious of time. We've just ticked over the hour, and we've got probably one more round from the panel. So if there's anything burning that anyone wants to say from the audience before we move into this last conversation. Yes, what's your name?
It's burning, I can't help it. Ray used the word before, real. Is that correct, right? Yeah. Which is like a bit of a pet hobby horse of mine, because I think when we go into a men's shed, or we go into a men's table, or we go into work, or we go to a clinical psychologist, or we go to Kellie for help, or we go to a GP for help. One of the things that I think holds us all back in almost everything we do is the difference between who we are and an act. And so many people in a workplace, for example, or that you would meet, or we would meet, or anyone, are not being real, as Ray said, because there's an act. I mean, I put it to you, Kellie, that a lot of the CEOs you work for, they're talking wellbeing, and me being a bit of a cynic, but really 222 million with a gross profit of 3 million is not enough, and that's what they want to think about. How can we make it 4 million, 5 million? So I'm asking, I guess, how much lip service is there to the wellbeing when so many people that we're surrounded with, just about every one of us has an act. If we went into the workforce and we are who we are and we said what we felt, and I guess I'm not having go at you, Kellie, when you said we can't change, you were kind of shaking your head. We're talking about, can we bring about, real change in the workforce out of concentrating on wellbeing and being real. There's got to be that opening for mine. How we address it at a men's table or a men's shed or in this room is really, I think, key to so many of the underlying things that hold back productivity.
Yes, thank you. And what's your name, sorry?
Nigel.
Nigel, thanks Nigel. There was one other hand that shot up when I said, is there a burning question? So why don't we hear your comment or question as well, and then we'll see if we can thread that into our last round.
Just very briefly, there's one word that I haven't heard mentioned in the whole afternoon, because we talk about wellness, but we don't talk about spiritual wellness. And I just wondered what everybody's view, or the panel's view, might be on spiritual wellness.
Fantastic. Almost a little bit of symmetry too in those two comments. If we could be real at work and we could sort of step into ourselves more fully. So thank you for that comment. And is there somebody else that wanted to comment as well? Yes.
Yeah, I might just, you mentioned shortly about...
Just a bit louder.
I'll even stand up for you.
Hey!
This point I just sat at the front. Just touching on that, maybe that's what you were talking about before. I wrote down here, men suck at talking, it's paraphrasing. What I want to know is...
Paraphrase.
That's what I said. just keen to know if the panel can give any advice on how to identify when people or men are struggling, how to get them to talk, and if necessary, how to get them to professional help.
Great, thank you. So we've got a few threads there that we're going to magically all weave together and put into a nice little box for you in the next 15 minutes. Oh, one more question or comment?
Yeah, just on that and what people are saying.
Just a bit louder as well.
Also what Ray said, it is about that personal connection that you make with the employee. I worked in a workplace that was a very country-based area. They all played footy together. They all brought their personal griefs to work. So if they had an argument on the footy field, it would definitely be in the workplace. I was there for a period of time, but actually putting the time in, sitting with them, going in the car with them, going on a jet patcher, going to see them on the radar, going to see them on the tractor, and having that time with them, sitting there and building that relationship, having those conversations actually came naturally.
Yeah.
Like you could see it, they started to trust you, and it's about you as the person that's there having the knowledge of where they could go at that time. So it's not, from my experience, it was more about, okay, what knowledge do I need? I can't help them if they are in a crisis, but do I have the crisis number on hand? Do I know that there is a GP in my local area that I can call and book it into?
Yeah.
Is there another way of men's shed around the corner? Is there men's stable? Is there other avenues that I can then say, look, I might not be able to help you right now, but I do know these connections. How about I help you make this call?
Fantastic. Thank you. Great conversation and dialogue. So why don't we see if we can offer strategies, tools, practical things that we can do, and then we're probably near the end. Who wants to go first?
I love what you're just saying, Dan, and I think that's the role that I am hopeful that more HR leaders will play. And some of the best cultures and teams that I've fortunately been part of are those where there is a bit of a social connection. And, I've actually, wanted to do some research, and I've gone up and actually interviewed different leaders who are building the best teams, and they're like these magnets. Everyone wants to work with them, and people will change companies to want to work with these leaders. And, wherever that's Alaska or anywhere else. And I'll ask them, what makes you such a good leader? Why do so many people want to work with you? And often, the common thread seems to be around having those social connections, spending time together, where they're having real conversations, not just all about, are you getting the work done? Are you sort of getting the results? Are we delivering the team sort of success metrics? It's just having that open dialogue. Maybe it's banter, maybe it's humour, maybe it's just vulnerable conversations as well. A lot of teams go through those ups and down moments, but having the courage, I think, to have those conversations, they are the better teams. That's not every team you're ever going to find yourself in. They seem to be the rare few. Hopefully they're on the improve, and I do whatever I can in any place that I work at to really play a role with leaders and teams to create those opportunities, to create the amazing connection that you can have within a team. There's, most of us are probably familiar with like engagement surveys. They can be good, they can be not so good, depending on however they're sort of played out at different workplaces. Gallup have one of their items, do you have a best friend at work? For the very reason around, do you have someone that you can talk to? And a lot of people, really struggle sometimes moving on from a workplace if they've put all the effort in to really build a community, build a connection. So although it may not be the right workplace for them, they may struggle to leave because they're like, I don't want to have to start all that up again. Because it means so much, I think, when you're working somewhere, and to have that openness around those conversations. So it's a good topic. And then, is it Ray or Raymond? Raymond? Ray? You Ray? So on the spiritual wellness that you raised, I love that you raised that. And in the software companies that I've worked with, unfortunately, if I use the word spirituality, people would just be like, leave the room right now. That just not seem to go down with developers. and product managers. So sometimes in my role, I have to find ways to connect. And if that means just, starting small to work out something bigger, then that's a role that I will then play. I see it have such a powerful role to play though, in some workplaces and in some individuals, and I like to create options and flexibility and choice and never have anything off the table if there's an opportunity to go there. And, even talking with some friends over the weekend, my friend, she's written a book on feedback and works with execs and boards and different teams on getting great cultures and building out cultures, and a lot of consulting work. And she'll do a lot of work on meditation and going to ashrams and, the sound sort of healing areas and things. And I love that space, and whether it be chakras and, it can go in any sort of area. I recognise it's not for everyone's topic, but if there are opportunities to focus on that and go there, then I'm a complete supporter and fan and love to open up the door to those conversations. It hasn't been all that inviting and an attractive option at this stage from where I've worked in most aspects. But is there something more that you wanted to talk with that?
I just wondered why
It wasn't raised.
but one of the key issues I find is people want to know what is my purpose in life.
Yeah.
And the thing is that hasn't been mentioned.
Yes.
We're leaving that for Sam to answer, actually.
Yeah, I'll comment on that. Is that all right? Yep.
I think Alex was touching on it before as well.
Yeah, I think we did mention purpose and meaning a few times, to be fair on us. But also, to your point though, the spiritual word, look, I do usually actually frame well-being as biopsychosocial, cultural, spiritual well-being. So that's usually how I frame it, but for whatever reason I didn't say that today. But I totally agree with you. So
Did you totally agree or you don't agree?
I do agree. No, I agree. That's how I define well-being, is biopsychosocial, cultural and spiritual well-being. And as you say, spirit is around meaning, purpose, values, what is our core sort of deepest identity in nature. And often a lot of health does come back down to that. People change because they change their identity of who they are. It's one of the foundations of change, is that, we can all force willpower on any behaviour for 21 days, but if we're really going to change something, it's because at a very deep level we've seen ourselves in a different light. And we see we value ourselves more, or we feel we deserve more because we see who we are. And so I respect and acknowledge and agree that that's a huge part of this conversation. And normally I do raise it, so apologies that I didn't. But certainly we've raised purpose and meaning. Around the idea of identifying sort of risks of burnout or identifying concerns and meeting people at the real level, you are right. I mean, we all put on a sort of face, and we all have to. You got your dad persona, you got your brother persona, you got your son, you got your employee persona, and that's natural. These are ways that we cope and deal with the world. Though, as a GP, I find my job is to, within minutes, try and break that persona. I mean, I'm totally aware that every person who comes in is in their persona mode, right? Whether it's patient and they don't want to be seen to be vulnerable, they want to be all these sort of things. So I'm fully aware of all these biases and everything that's floating around the room, right? But to be a good healer, inverted commas, is that I've got to get to their core as quickly as I can, right? Safely, obviously. And that comes from authenticity. And if I'm authentic about who I am and what I want to do with this person, I find that very quickly they're authentic about who they are. And so that's a really important point. The point around identifying, I suppose, symptoms of mental health concerns or burnout. Obviously, to identify symptoms of mental health concerns might be a diagnostic thing, but for burnout, I would summarise it simply as just less. There's a less of that person. They're less available. They're less present in the workplace. They're less patient. They're less compassionate. They're less interacting. These are all signs of a person starting to withdraw, both biopsychosocially, culturally, and spiritually. Then there's something going on. There is some burnout happening, or some sort of context like that. And then what do you do about that? How do you get people to open up, and how do you bring in authenticity, and how do you get people to open up? Well, my experience is many things, but one thing I will say is that Aristotle had this kind of right. So Aristotle had what he called the modes of persuasion, and the modes of persuasion are how do you essentially persuade? How do you do a speech or a talk or a conversation that persuades someone? And it needs three things. It needs logos, ethos, and pathos. And logos is the logic, ethos is the credibility and the trust, and pathos is the story. And the story is where we have forgotten a little bit, especially in biomedical science. We think it's all logic. You just tell someone that they've got diabetes and they'll change. It's bullshit. People don't change for that reason, right? People change because of the story that is attached to them and what it means to them, and the story that they've heard from others. And so I find one of the best ways to sort of bridge that quickly is, one, to fully be present and hear their story. That's number one. And number two is either share my story, or if it's inappropriate to do so, share a de-identified story of someone else who may have been through a similar thing. Because then they can relate to that. And within that story, you share how they got through it, how that other person got through it. And then you're showing them that there's hope. Now, it may not be the way that they get out of it, but that's not the point of sharing the story. The story is to connect, and the story is to demonstrate hope and progress, that there is somewhere forwards. And from there, when people sense that, and you can see it, you can feel it in a consult. I'm sure Alex is the same. You feel this shift in the consult where they go, okay, I feel like I've got hope. I don't know how it's going to manifest exactly. And this is where it's very important that, say, workplaces or other settings, as you said, build in a knowledge of what resources are available to them, whether it's online thing or men's lines or men's tables or whatever. Is to be aware of where where a person could go. It may not be, it may unlikely be inside the workplace, but so there's sort of three aspects that identifying with less, connecting through story, and having options where that person can go. And the last thing I'm going to say, I'm sorry I'm going to be hogging the mic, is that when we are, I suppose, consulting workplaces on well-being, is that one of the most, I don't know, the sirens of temptation with workplace wellbeing programs is just to do, as I said, like a meditation group or a yoga group or something like that, and just to do it ad hoc and just hope that people turn up and hope that people get better. And it doesn't work, and they never work. And this is the sort of point you mentioned before about this sort of fakeness of people, corporates pretending they're doing wellbeing. But the ones who do it well, they actually go through a more systematic process. They go through a sort of what we call implementation science process. So they assess the needs and the gaps that exist within that setting. They assess the strengths that exist as well, because there are many, in this room there would be an innumerable number of strengths, right? That if we just all sat down and shared what we're good at, you would be amazed. I'm sure there'd be ex-chefs here and PTs and all kinds of amazing skills and talent in this room. And then you co-design. And co-design is one of those buzzwords, but nonetheless, it is true that if you involve people in the process, they are much more likely to open up and share what they really want out of it and where they want to see it go. And so co-design we're seeing in health as a major important area, and then it's implementing, and then it's evaluating, and then it's scaling. But so there are ways that you can, in a systematic, sort of evidence-based, collaborative way, implement these programs that are personalised to the setting with which you're delivering. And you can only personalise that when you actually empathise and assess, and you co-design at the same time.
Well, yeah, well done, Sam. Thank you. Just to add on the idea of masks and mask wearing, that we all sort of wear masks and we all kind of have some level of authenticity, but there's some faking, and actually that's quite normal. We can't be unfiltered in the world. I think the point is the cavern between the true self and the person that we're showing. If it's cavernous, or if there's a big distance between the two, we're being very far away from authentic. This is where mental health disorders live. This is where the outside world doesn't match the inside world. That perception of how we're perceiving the world doesn't match. And I think, and that's, back to, didn't catch your name, but back to what you were saying. There's a few different things that I want to say, and I want to respond to progressively as what was been said. But such a great story, great share about how someone started talking. And I think the research, and probably David's going to mention in the men's table about all the success they have there, but the research says men share shoulder to shoulder and actually converse to, I see people face to face, but converse to what we intuitively think about what it is to share. Men are more often, when you're going for a walk with a man, when you're standing next to a man, when you're doing something with a man, that incites this idea or invites this idea to share and to talk openly and to share the story, which I think is a lovely way to put it, to share the story. So I thought just to respond to a couple of those things, and of course we did speak a bit about spirituality in terms of meaning, but I think additionally is the idea that, a sense of spirituality is also a sense of community and belonging. And again, this is a loneliness epidemic that we're experiencing. Not feeling that we're belonging, or a man not feeling they're belonging, is, for perhaps reasons that we don't fully understand, a huge risk factor in developing a mental health disorder. And one of the highest risk factors in male suicide is loneliness. And so the idea of connection and community, wherever that falls, and perhaps it's at a place of worship, that is fantastic. So I'm just thinking about that. I did want to say a couple of things back to why men don't talk. So I think from an idea, so the three sort of ideas are that men might not believe that it's going to help, or they might not feel adequate within themselves, or they might not have the capacity to talk. So these three sort of ideas are why men don't talk. That first one might not think it would help. That is collectively everyone's responsibility. So that's what we're doing here today. That's what organisations can do, as far as I can see it, to at least create a culture that talking's okay. And maybe that's an Are You OK Day, or maybe that's something else, and that I think is individual to the organisation. But addressing those other ones about adequacy, creating a safe space to be fragile, and also giving someone space. If you can see they're withdrawing, giving someone space because they might not have the capacity to talk. But if we're not a talker, and I was thinking about this, I was talking about, that's what I do all day, every day. I talk and I listen, well, more than talk. And people know they're coming to my room to sort of have a conversation. So I'm a little bit fortunate in that way. So I was thinking, even if we don't have the skills ourselves, or we don't have the desire or the inclination, a really important point, particularly in burnout, is something Sam touched on. If you're getting a little bit less of someone. So the way I like to operationalise burnout, whenever I talk to someone about who might be experiencing a burnout episode, stressed out is something that we might think of as someone's burning out, they're stressed out. Stressed out is over-engaged in the work. We're doing too much work. We're working on the weekends. We're thinking about it all the time. Conversely, burnout is marked by disengagement. So someone who's disengaged in the workplace. So if you're observing, if you maybe the conversation's a bit hard, but you notice person X, employee X, man X, or it doesn't have to exclusively be men in this context, they're over-engaged and then all of a sudden they're disengaged, there's a good sign that someone's experiencing something more than what might be expected from, what might be healthy well-being or maybe even mental ill health. So I wanted to make that point as an external metric that's just a little bit different to having a conversation, what we can observe, what behaviours. And of course there's all the destructive behaviours that someone might be going through if they're unwell, of course heavy drinking, and which we didn't really touch on today. And the very last point about how we talk to people in these ways, how we talk to people about their well-being or their mental health, or if we think they're struggling, we've got to be mindful about how to approach either from a place of compassion. So quite often we approach with a place, we don't realise it, but it's a stigmatising approach of pity. So we say, I'm sorry you feel that way, that sounds hard. And that is, we don't even intuitively know it, but we're actually othering that person, saying that's your issue, and I'm sorry you're having that issue. Compassion is more about normalisation. So, yeah, this job is hard. It can get you down, I feel you. I've been there myself, if that's appropriate to share, in that way. Pity versus compassion. And in fact, not that we've talked about it much today, but Dr Sam Manger has a GP podcast. What's it called? The GP show. And he's got a really great one from Associate Professor Kristen Neff. Is that right? Have I got her name right? She wrote the book on pity versus compassion. Compassion. And I would, if you want to know a bit more about that topic, a real riveting podcast. So if I can just endorse Sam's, but I think it's from a few years back, but if you go hunting.
I'll do a bit of promotion, yeah. This is the GP show, and that episode was Self-Compassion with Dr. Kristen Neff. Yep.
Love it.
Yeah, that's me, yeah.
Great. Thank you, all of you. Just a few comments from me and then into some wrap-up. Firstly, I want to finish by busting a myth of the men don't talk. I didn't catch your name. Sean raised, and it's been in the theme all day. I can tell you now, men do talk. They just need the right place. They just need to have the right environment. And it could be in the car, driving to the footy in the country. It could be through a story that they've heard someone else share, and then that opens the door of vulnerability, and then they're willing. But Men's Table is proving that men do talk. They certainly talk. They just have to be given the right environment. And many places, such as what you were saying before about some workplaces are the last place they're going to talk. So that's work for all those leaders who have created those sort of cultures where men can't talk, or indeed anyone can't talk. And just briefly about the Men's Table, our vision is healthy men, healthy masculinities, and healthy communities. We know that the science and the research shows if you get men looking after themselves and each other and having open conversations, their health improves. Apparently, loneliness has a certain level of loneliness has the same impact as smoking 15 cigarettes a day on health. So there's a physical health impact of loneliness. There's some research that's come out in the last few years on that. Healthy masculinities is helping men to learn just 1 month at a time, one conversation at a time, in our case, one table at a time, that it's okay to show up with their tears and their muscles. It's okay to be, to have the combo. That's the whole person. That's being spiritual, living into our full selves. And healthy communities, we know from our latest research, which is a couple of copies here, where we asked women, what's been the impact on you of a man in your life being at a men's table? And they said, a lot. We're healthier, we're happier, there's more harmony at home. 10% of the women said there's less anger and violence in the home just because their man or the man in their life goes to a men's group once a month and has an open-hearted conversation. That's significant. That's a ripple effect. So that's our vision. That's what we are striving for. We're a not-for-profit. There's 200 tables around Australia, 2,200 men in the practice of this. There's a few of the men, good men, at different tables around Melbourne here today. Graham in the city. Sorry, I've forgotten your name. Hillary in Sunshine, and that's right, Kellie in Dandenong. So have a chat to them about their experiences. And workplaces, we're just starting to nibble into, and with the help of Prima, lean into how we can contribute and support workplaces, and particularly with weeks like Men's Health Week. So look us up next year if you're looking to do something in your workplace. We're a charity, so we're also up for fundraising. Anyone you know who's philanthropic, who's got access to a foundation, some other channel for funding, we're always open to talking to funders as well. So that's the end of the content. 3 layers of thank you. Firstly, a big round of applause to Alex Mottee, Kellie, Egan and Sam Manger. Fantastic panel, guys. You rocked. It was such great content. Really, really nailed it in every way. The second round of applause, give to yourselves. Thank you for coming and for joining in. And for the last thank you, I wanted to hand over to Peter George, co-founder of Prima, to say the last word. But thank you to Prima for being our generous hosts, for putting this event together and working with the Men's Table to make it all happen. So a big round of applause to Prima. Thank you.
Yeah, look, thanks very much for joining us today, and in the flavour of the comments here, let's have a good conversation at the bar in a minute or two. You don't need to stay, but I'd love to have it follow on. David, congratulations on the great work you're doing. Really, I think it's outstanding, and good promotion for the Men's Table today. And to the other panellists, Alex, Kellie and Sam, thank you very much for your comments. I wanted to just spend 2 minutes drawing a few things together, because I didn't want, there's so much information that we've got tonight, and the conversation has jumped around to a whole range of topics and a whole range of research and a whole range of ideas about people. And I didn't want you to leave with some of the comments that depression's going up, burnout's going up, psychosocial risk in companies is going up, culture's going down, that it's very difficult to talk to men because golf clubs are not very good, and the churches have decreased and all that sort of thing. and that we've got a real problem here which could possibly get out of control, burnouts, at epidemic levels, and I've written one more thing down, but I forget what it was now. But we've got enough problems. But I want you to leave with one or two ideas that came out today, and one of the things that I thought Sam brought out is the ability to self-heal. I'm a psychologist. I've worked as a psychologist for over 35 years, and we've run an EAP program, so I've observed a lot of people who need a lot of healing. If you cut your arm and you put a little bit of antibiotics on it, it heals. You break your arm, it heals. You just need to get the process started. And, we heard from David that the men's shed, one guy kicks the door open about vulnerability, it starts to spread. Not a big deal. We've got a self-healing process going on. The karate story we heard. Let's just do a little bit of karate, and then suddenly the ball starts to roll down the hill. And I'm amazed as a psychologist, you just get someone started, and there's a great self-healing capability for an individual and a great self-healing capability for an organisation. So here's a couple of questions. When I talk to my son occasionally, I say, how's your mental health? He lets me know. It's good, bad, whatever. It just gets going. One sentence in the whole of the night, but I ask him, in an appropriate setting, of course, how's it going? Pretty easy to ask. There's a bit of a joking way of saying, how are we going here with psychosocial risk? I ask people, what's the moralometer around here like? A bit of a joke, isn't it? And people go, oh, not too bad. I say, out of 10, what's it like? Well, it's really a 3. Tell me more. A little bit of a starting thing, the ball rolls, and you go from there. And, obviously, someone mentioned, are you okay? Are you okay the methodology should be used every day. How's it going? Are you okay? So what I wanted you to leave today is we've had some brilliant speakers and some brilliant input here. We've understood the risks, the issues, the epidemic of poor health and poor mental health and all the like. But, I want you to leave with just a little bit of a commitment. You don't need to boil the ocean here. With your company, with your friends, with, just with your family, little question here, little question there, get it rolling and the self-healing will start. So I want you to leave with that bit of optimism, okay? Guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
So please stay and mingle with Minton Mingle. Drinks over in the corner. Stick around and meet a few other people. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kellie.